Okay, perfect. So thank you everyone for joining. This is Adrienne. I'm at Usability Sciences. I'm actually the Director of Design Thinking here. I've been in research now about 15 years. A little about me. I am a teacher mommy, a COVID teacher mommy now. Worked in research, as I mentioned, for about 15 years now. I have the opportunity to network and meet a lot of really cool, interesting people. Today, we're going to actually hear from one of those people. A couple of things to get us started. So I have to, as the advertisers say, pay bills, right? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Usability Sciences for a couple of reasons. One, because they've given me the opportunity to host events like this. So thank you, Usability Sciences, for that. The other part is we are actually hiring 2 new researchers. So we have an entry-level position and we have a mid-level user research position available. So I'm going to drop the link to those job postings on our site. I encourage you to apply, share, feel free to ping me and ask questions if you have any about those positions. I will say we are a user research firm based out of Dallas, Texas. So these roles are going to be based in Dallas. But again, if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out. So kind of transitioning a little bit, how we got here, right? There's always a story. A couple months ago, I started working on a huge project, okay? So we're talking just short of 100 one-on-one user interviews, with some quant work, global participants, and that put me in an interesting position, right? So if you saw the last talk, we talked about different ways to gather, collect, and store, and then analyze qualitative data. So being the researcher I am, I jumped online and said, there has to be a tool for this, right? A better tool for this. Something that was going to help me keep all of those users straight. I had the additional complexity of, as I mentioned, this was a global project. So I only got to participate in about half because I had a team running day sessions and then my team ran night sessions. So there was a lot of data to go through. Some of it I had not heard at all. We relied on keywords to be able to sift through data quickly. And again, like I mentioned, I knew there had to be a smarter way to do this. So intro, this tool called Delve, which is a software for analyzing qualitative data. It's super slick. We'll hear more about that in just a bit. But, I said, I might need some help. I want somebody to tell me, am I using this thing right? So I asked for a demo, had the opportunity to meet LaiYee, and she jumped on a call with me and talked me through the tool and how to do it. I had already made some mistakes. And I asked her during that conversation, what are the top mistakes that you see, right? What do people constantly get wrong? And she went into that. And then it dawned on me, the world needs to hear this. So I asked her just as sweetly as I could if she would mind presenting to each of you. Part of this is our pre-World Usability Day event. If you're not familiar with World Usability Day, please Google it. It is a day to celebrate the human aspects of design and research and how we use our skill set to solve real problems. We didn't want to, take away anyone's shine for the events that are being held tomorrow. So if you're not attending anything, please look them up. They're great events. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions so they kind of get to know a little bit about you. So can you tell us more about you, what do you do now and kind of what your background is?
Yeah, so my name is LaiYee Ho. I am the co-founder of Delve, which is an online qualitative analysis tool. And before I became the co-founder of this company, I had spent my career as a UX designer and researcher, working at various tech companies, building products, and learning about how different users are using our product. And through that journey, I got very interested in qualitative research, specifically to really learn about behaviors and motivations behind the products that I was designing. And in that process, I went through a journey of trying out different tools for qualitative analysis. I was never able to really find the right tool or process for myself in terms of how I did qualitative analysis. So then I decided with my co-founder to break off from the company we were working at and then go off on our own. We started Delve, and it started off with 6 months of just user research, learning about how people are doing research. And then now we spend our time building a tool to help people do qualitative research and qualitative coding. And that's how we find ourselves here.
That's awesome. So what has been kind of your biggest challenge in socializing this tool and getting this tool out to researchers? And, because your audience is rather large, right? It's not just UX researchers, it's academic researchers and medical researchers. So what has been your biggest challenge in getting this out to the population?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, the challenge is always about continuously learning and making sure that what we're building is really fitting the needs of different researchers. Like you mentioned, we have people that come from UX, usability, also medical research, academic research. There's a lot of different styles of qualitative analysis and research. So our job is really to synthesize all that and boil it down into a tool that can really be accessible to a lot of different kinds of research. And then another challenge I have is that because I am, naturally a researcher and designer, I want to spend all my time on the research and the design of the product. Part of building this company was learning, also the business side, like learning how to market, learning how to put the product out there. But it's all been a super fun journey.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so I don't want to get ahead of your presentation. So I have one more question, but I'm going to wait until you're done. So if you're ready, I'm going to go off and I'm just going to let you present. Everyone on the call, if you want to drop your questions in the chat or wait till the end and then drop your questions in the chat, we have built-in time for you to ask questions directly, okay? All right.
All right, thank you. All right. All right, so I'm going to be giving an introduction to qualitative coding with Delve. I already had an introduction here, but here's my email address and my Twitter and my LinkedIn, so definitely connect with me or tweet out things during the presentation if you'd like. But nice to meet all of you. I am the co-founder of Delve. So I'm going to walk through an introduction of what qualitative coding is, and then I'm going to talk about different types of coding. I'll give a step-by-step example of how to do qualitative coding, and then at the end, I'll talk about different tools. Then I'll hand it off to do the Q&A. So just a quick introduction. What is qualitative coding? So when we're talking about qualitative coding here, we're not talking about engineering coding or programming. Specifically, qualitative coding is just a term to describe this process of taking your unstructured data and then systematically categorizing it in order to find themes and patterns for analysis. So a lot of you on this call probably have done this kind of process. Maybe you didn't call it qualitative coding, maybe you did, but that's just the term we're going to be using in this presentation to talk about this type of analysis. In a lot of cases, qualitative coding happens here in the process, the analysis and the report writing phase. This image here doesn't represent every person's research process, but it's just an example of how it can look. So usually you've done your research planning, you've conducted your interviews, you've prepared your data by transcribing it, and then when you're at the point of doing analysis, that's where qualitative coding comes into play. And qualitative coding is useful for all kinds of qualitative data, whether you're working with transcriptions, diary accounts, audio, video, anything that is unstructured and that you want to make sense of. For this presentation, I will be specifically focused on transcriptions, but do know that it is applicable to other types of data as well. And when I'm talking about codes, what I mean by code, you can think of it like a tag or a label or even something like a hashtag, but pretty much what it is it's a label you can assign to an excerpt of text. You can apply it to a paragraph, sentence, or phrase. And then you can use that code to then go across multiple data sources and find information that fits that code. So just a quick example of qualitative coding and what a code is. This is an excerpt from an interview where the participant is talking about their breakfast habits. They're talking about how they say, I wake up around 8 and I'll eat breakfast in the kitchen. And then they go on to talk about what they eat. So if I'm in a process of coding, what I can do is I can highlight this phrase, this sentence here, and I can code it as breakfast routine. So breakfast routine is a code that I've applied to that text. And now I can use that code to look for breakfast routines across other transcripts as well. So that's kind of coding boiled down into a nutshell. When you do qualitative coding, there's a lot of benefits. It helps you stay systematic and rigorous. It helps you keep track of the patterns and themes that you find across your data. Once you've done your coding and you're at that report writing phase, super easy to go in and find your quotes. And then you can also check your own biases. I'll talk through two different types of coding processes, deductive and inductive coding. So first, deductive coding. This is a top-down approach to coding. So what this is basically when you start off with a set of codes. So you're going to predetermine what those codes are. Then you're going to look at your transcripts and see what kind of text fits those codes. This is really good if you're doing something very structured, maybe you're evaluating a program or describing a type of behavior, and you generally know the categories or buckets of what you're looking for. So this is where you can take a deductive approach, which is just top down. Inductive coding is an alternate method, and this is a ground up approach. So this is when you don't start off with codes. You're going to actually first look at your data. And then from your data, you're going to determine what those codes are and what those themes are. If any of you have done affinity mapping with post-it notes, that is inherently an inductive method. Inductive methods are really good for anything that's discovery or exploratory, or if you're trying to come up with a new theory or a new research framework, you can utilize inductive coding. So in practice, when you end up doing research, oftentimes you'll do a mix of inductive and deductive. You'll do a hybrid between the two. And then in my example that I'm going to show in this presentation, I'm actually going to combine both. So I'm going to go through a rapid step-by-step overview of what an end-to-end process of coding looks like. Then I will slow it down and then talk through each one step by step. So as a summary, step-by-step coding, there's a lot of different ways to do it. So before I go into that example, I also want to mention that delvtool.com/guide is where we have a lot of different resources and articles. So outside of what I'm about to show you. So do check that out. There's other ways to code other than what I'm about to show. All right. So for step one, create initial codes. So I'm going to make a couple of codes to start with. I'm going to read through transcripts, decide what to code. So I'm basically going through transcripts and seeing anything that fits those initial codes that I created. I'm going to go ahead and add new codes based off of what I see in the data. Collating those codes with excerpts, that just means organizing all my quotes according to the code. I will then be grouping those codes into themes. I'll then be evaluating and revising the themes, maybe taking a look at different ways to rearrange and organize the codes. And then at the end, write your narrative. And this is when you tell the story of your data. You'll talk about your themes. You'll put in quotes to, highlight those themes and show them. And then overall, this is where you piece the narrative together. So that's a super, super brief one example of how to do qualitative coding step by step. So now I'm going to break it down and go through each step in more depth. And again, I also want to reiterate that as I dive into each step, there's no right or wrong way to code. This is really just one way to code that I'm about to show you. There's only more or less appropriate ways to code depending on your research objective and what you're looking for in your data. So do take this example as just an example and a starting point for learning more about other ways to code. Okay, so step one, create initial codes. So how do you come up with those initial codes? I've got a couple tips to offer. So you can create initial codes based off of research questions. So I have examples of research questions here. In this research, I'm looking to understand what motivates participants to start a weight loss program. So I can create a code called motivations. And what I'm going to do is in all my transcripts, I will then just look for any time an answer or participant is talking about something related to that question. So I'll code it as motivations. Same thing for these other examples, frustrations and reactions. Those are really just codes that I've translated from the questions themselves. You can also create codes based off of existing frameworks. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs right here, that is a research framework that already exists based off of past research in psychology. And if I want to look at my information, my data from this lens, I can just turn that into codes. So self-fulfillment needs, psychological needs, and basic needs, I derive these directly from this framework, and that can be my starting point for how to code my data. Once you come up with those initial codes, I recommend keeping a code book. All that is really just a document where you can store the name of your code. You can write a definition of the code and then just show some examples of what to include. It's a great way to just stay organized. You can keep this in a Word document or a physical sheet of paper, or if you use software like the qualitative analysis tool Delve, there's a code book feature included in that, and then you can store it in the software as you go. And that's just what it looks like inside the Delve qualitative analysis software. You just click on codes on the left, and then you have your code book. Step 2, read through the transcripts. So if you have audio files or video files, make sure you get them transcribed. It's not totally required, but I always recommend it. Once you have a transcription of your recordings, it's a lot easier to go through the text, and then you can tag and highlight and label and do your coding more easily. So in this reading phase, just spend time familiarizing yourself with the transcripts. Definitely take notes as you go. Jot down any thoughts that you have about things that are surfacing and looking interesting. Step 3, decide what to code and then add new codes. So this is a step where you're going to go through your transcripts and then start to do your coding. So you want to make sure that you code anything that's related to your initial codes. You want to code anything that's interesting or jumps out and surprises you. You can also code any recurring patterns that you see throughout the transcripts. And then I'm going to walk through 3 example coding methods. So these are kind of like formalized definitions of types of coding, but really think of this as just a starting point. You can mix and match different types of coding methods. Oftentimes when you do it, you'll be utilizing multiple. So I'll just walk through a couple examples to show you how coding can work. So let me talk through descriptive coding. So descriptive codes, these are often in the form of a noun, and this is really just a code that you use to summarize the topic of your data. So I'm going to switch tabs here to a project. So I'm showing this to you right now in the software tool Delve, and I've got a sample transcript. So I'm going to do some descriptive coding. So in this first paragraph here, Carla, my participant, she says, our organization is about 1,000 employees, and I was brought in to join a design team focused on internal experience. So I can summarize that in a number of ways. I'm going to make a call and just say the summary for this will be organization and design team. So I'm going to type that in here, organization and design team. Press enter, and now I've just coded it with that code. In the second paragraph, Sam says, there's 3 designers on my team. Each of us owns a part of the experience. And then they talk about what their coworkers do. So I'm going to highlight this entire paragraph, and I'm just going to summarize that and describe that as designer roles. So there we go. That's how you can do descriptive coding. In vivo coding is another type of coding, and this is one where you're really going to look at things from the lens and the perspective of the participant. So you're going to use the literal words that a participant uses to describe their experience, and this allows you to reflect their perspective rather than your perspective as a researcher. So I'll show an example of that. So in vivo coding, so Anuj here, he says, I think that's one of the fears with people doing interview research is the amount of data they'll have to analyze. They go, I'm going to make such a mess, and it's going to feel overwhelming. So I think one thing that stands out to me in those sentences is he uses the terms feel overwhelming. So with in vivo coding, what I want to do is I want to use the actual words he chooses. So I'm going to highlight these two sentences. I'm going to create a code called feel overwhelming. Press enter, and that is an in vivo code. Just to show another example, in the second sentence, he says, I've just wasted so much time and I've got no results. I've increased my anxiety about what I do because I've made the analysis so massive. So from this one, increase my anxiety, I can extract that and then use that as a code. So in vivo coding is really just how to code using the words the participant uses. Now, process coding is another type of coding, and this is one when you're using codes to communicate the actions in the transcript itself. So this is great if you're studying a process. Earlier, I had an example with breakfast routine. So process coding, I can basically just extract the types of actions that people are doing. So as an example of process coding, I got a transcript here where Ashley in this first sentence is saying, I generally read through all the transcripts. So to turn that into a process code, I can click on that, and then I can make a code reading through transcripts. So you can see I kind of extracted that part of the process and what the action is that she's doing. In the second paragraph here, Ben says, but I did use the search to look for quotes sometimes, and that was pretty helpful also. So with this, I can turn that into an action as well. Ben is looking for quotes, so I'm going to make a code here. Looking for quotes. So there we go. So that's process coding. So that's kind of a very, very quick first round pass of coding with descriptive, in vivo, and process coding methods. So once you've done your coding, in step 4, that's when you collate the codes with your excerpts. And all that really means is bringing together all those excerpts that you've coded across your entire project. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in a project where I've already done some coding. So this project here, I have a number of codes here on the right-hand side. I've already gone through my transcripts and I've coded across transcripts. So I've looked for motivations across Ariel's, Connor's, and Gary's transcript. And collating is really just bringing it all together in one place. So when you're using software like Delve, you can go to see details to the right of that code and then pull up a list of all the quotes that are related to that code. So rather than looking at everything organized by transcript, I'm now looking at my quotes organized by code. If you're not using software, this is something that you can do in Microsoft Word or Google Docs. So you can just have a document with the name of the code across the top. You can copy and paste your quotes into the document. Or if you're using pen and paper, you can cut out pieces of your transcript and then organize them into piles and then label those piles with the codes. You're basically just organizing them all together. Step 5, this is when you're going to take a step further. You're going to start to group those codes into themes. And if you've done affinity mapping with Post-it notes, this is pretty much that point where you've got Post-it notes, you have them in your initial groups, but now you're going to have yet another initial group to connect 2 different groups. And the point of this is really just to get another level of organizational structure. You want to kind of find causal conditions and context. So maybe there's one code that represents a phenomenon that leads into another code. You want to connect those. And then basically you're just coming up with these broad categories. So just to show you what that can look like here. So I got a project here where I have a flat list of codes. Collaborating, communication, helping with local community, informing decisions, and working as a team. So I'm going to think about how I can turn that into themes and categories. So as I'm looking at it, I'm seeing a number of codes that are related to kind of like collaboration and working as a team. So I'll just make a category called working together. And then I'm going to drag and drop the codes underneath. So working as a team, communication, and collaborating. I put those 3 codes under the category of working together. And then for these other 2, informing decisions and helping local community, I can give that a category. I can name it, making an impact. So now I'm going to drag those codes underneath there. So now you see I went from a flat list of codes into a structure now where I've got themes and categories one step higher, working together and making an impact with the codes underneath. Step 6, this is when you're going to start to evaluate and revise those themes. So I made a decision just now about how to group those themes together, but I want to consider, are there different ways to structure it? Does every theme that I have in there have sufficient data to back it up? Is there any code there that doesn't have enough evidence that maybe I want to eliminate now at this round? So the way that I can do this, so if you're using other tools like pen and paper or Word document, Google Doc, you're basically just going to, delete certain themes, combine different ones together. And let me just show you what that can look like when you're using software like Delve. So I have this flat list here. So one thing I can do in my revision is I can combine different similar codes together. So maybe working as a team and collaborating, I realize that there's not too much distinction between the two. I can even verify by looking at the quotes, and I can say, okay, these quotes really all belong together in one code. I can merge these two codes together. So I'm dragging this code up here. I'm going to drag it over to merge. I just combine those codes. So those quotes are all together in one code now. I'm going to rename this. So there we go. I've just restructured two codes combined into one. I can also evaluate, whether or not the structure I've created makes sense. Maybe collaborating as a team is something that works better as like a top level theme. So I'm basically going to restructure and rethink how I'm rearranging these things. Like maybe there's a different way to organize it. And then anything in here that I feel like I don't really have enough evidence for and maybe I don't want to use anymore, like communication, for example. Maybe I realize I only have one quote. I only see it appear in Matthew's transcript, so I don't need it anymore. I can go ahead and delete it. So that's really just that critical thinking process where I'm trying to decide, is this the structure that makes sense? Can I combine anything? Can I remove anything? So step 7, this is when you write your narrative. Lots of different ways to tell the story of your research, but overall, the benefit of coding is that when you get to this point where you're telling the story of your data, you already have these themes that you've fully thought out. And as you're writing your narrative, your goal is to communicate the validity of your analysis and conclusions. So I'm going to hop back over to my project where I've got a lot more coding done. So I can just show you different things that become easier once you've done your coding. So this project here, I've already finished my codes. They're here on the right-hand side. If I click on codes on the left, this is my code book where I've got my code descriptions. And this is where I can pull up any one of these codes and then see all the quotes underneath. When I'm writing my report, I might have a separate PowerPoint or a separate Google Doc or something. And then I'm going to start to talk about the top themes that came up in my codes. So if I'm going to talk about education and desire to learn, I'll start writing my narrative out in my document. But since I've already done my coding, I can pull this up. I can see how many transcripts it appeared in. I can say, okay, this is a code or a theme that showed up in 5 out of 9 of my transcripts, just about over half. I can, reference which interviews this theme showed up in, and then I can find the specific quotes. So I can say, okay, here's a quote from Connor I really want to add into my research. I can click on the link, takes me right back to the original spot in the transcript. I can copy and paste a segment of this, put that into my project. But as you can see, since everything is organized by code, very easy for me to go in, grab those quotes, put it in the right place. And then I can even keep track. If I used Connor's quote in one part of my research related to education and desire to learn, maybe I don't want to use his quote again. Maybe I want to use Jared's quote later on. So then I'll click on a different one. So super neat, super organized. You did the legwork already. So qualitative coding really helps you in this point where you're writing out your narrative. So that is the step-by-step process for qualitative coding. And then I'll now just talk about different tools that you can use for qualitative coding. You can do coding by hand. So that is really just, you have your transcripts, you have your pictures, having them printed out on sheets of paper, and then literally having your highlighter and your pens and jotting down notes. You can, cut it up, put it into piles. It's a great way to be very tactile about how you're doing your analysis. So that's one method. The downside of coding by hand, though, is that it can be very cumbersome if you have a lot of data. So, if you have something like over 100 transcripts, that can feel very unmanageable. Or if you're working collaboratively with people in different locations, very difficult to work with physical medium. The second option is coding with document processors. So things that you and your team are going to be familiar with already, whether it's Google Docs or Microsoft Word, Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel. And that you just bring your transcripts in there. You can use the comment function, the highlight function. You can create, different categories within spreadsheets. You can do coding that way. So benefit of that, it can be online and collaborative, but then one of the cons is that it's not designed for qualitative analysis. So when you get to that point where you're collating different quotes together by code, it might be a lot of manual work to copy and paste or create custom parts of your spreadsheet. So there's pros and cons to that. And then lastly, coding with software. So there's a lot of software that does exist specifically for qualitative analysis. And then when you do that, there's a number of different benefits. So I'll talk now specifically about the Delve qualitative analysis tool. So Delve is software to analyze qualitative data. That's what I was using to demonstrate different types of coding in this presentation. And when you're using Delve, there's a lot of different benefits to it. So first, it's a very simple and intuitive interface, so it can keep you from feeling overwhelmed. A big part of how we like to design Delve is to make sure that you're really focused on just the coding and just the analysis. You're not distracted by other pieces of it. You can save time. It automatically collates those codes for you. So I kind of showed you how you can code everything by motivations, click on see details, and then see all your quotes in one place. And then you can do things like search all your documents at once. So we have a great feature here where I can, search a couple words. If you remember a quote that you want to use, but you don't remember who said it, just type in a couple words. It'll pull up every time it shows up across your project. You can click on the link to bring you right back to that transcript and copy and paste that into your report. So that's a great time saver. It also enables remote collaboration. Since it's a web-based tool, you don't have compatibility issues between Mac or PC. It also live updates across all your computers. And then we also offer customer support. So if you're in Delve and then you need help with anything, you can click on this little chat box right there. You can reach out. One of us is going to get back to you, answer your questions. But yeah, overall, it's easy to learn. You can collaborate. We have affordable and flexible pricing. We've got customer support, and it's web-based, so you don't have that kind of compatibility issue. We got a lot of great reviews from current customers. We have customers telling us about how it's fantastic for qualitative analysis. It's a great option if you're teaching qualitative methods and technologies together, and it's also very easy to use and affordable. If you want to start a free trial or request a demo, you can just go to delvetool.com. We've got links right on our front page where you can, go ahead and sign up, test it out for yourself. I'm also happy to walk you through the software and show you specifically how it can work for you. And then I also want to share, again, delvetool.com/guide. This is where we have the essential guide to coding qualitative data. I've got articles and resources about many different types of qualitative coding, depending on your research objective. There might be other ways besides what I showed here today that might be very valuable for you. But yeah, this is our guide. So yeah, thank you so much. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much for that, for walking us through that. So I told you I had a couple of questions, right? Some of the things that I asked you when I got started. So I'm going to transition to a couple of those real quick. So if you're on the call and you have a question, please feel free to drop it into the chat. I'll work it into the conversation. The other question is if you could put your contact information back up. So I see that's there now.
Yep.
But when I got started, one of the things that I noticed is I had a lot of COVIDs by the time I talked to you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do you manage not having, 1,000 different codes? What is the proper way to kind of figure out how you're going to code this thing so it doesn't get unwieldy?
Yeah, so a couple ways. So one, if you're doing a very kind of open process where you're developing a lot of codes, that can be a very good thing to have a lot of different codes. But what's really valuable is that after you've done a decent amount of coding, to start to organize that into a structure and a hierarchy. So kind of like what I was showing here in this project here, where I was turning it into a hierarchy. If you've got a big list of codes like this, for example, turning into a hierarchy can really help because then you can expand and collapse. So I had a really big list of codes there, but once I collapse it into its categories, it dramatically reduces, what I'm seeing on the screen. And then whenever I need to, I can open up whichever ones I need. So that's one thing. So just keeping it organized with categories. Um, the other part of my answer is that another thing you can do is you could potentially prevent having too many codes by having an idea of like the structure ahead of time. Like maybe you already know there's kind of three big categories that you want to talk about in your report. And then you can, make a plan to make sure your codes kind of fit within that and don't go too much outside of it. And that means that would mean that you have less codes to have to manage as you're going if you're kind of sticking within some sort of guardrails.
Right. So for everyone who has not yet seen part one of this, one of the things that Ashley Connor and I talked about is, before you start down a research path at all, you need to think about, what does your process look like? So how are you going to take notes? What are you going to take notes in? When you get to the analysis part, how are you going to do that, right? One of the things that I noticed about this tool, right? I think as researchers, UX researchers, we got away from, for a while, verbatim transcripts, right? We would listen to the participant, kind of make up our own thing, right? However we perceive that, write that down. How did y'all make the decision of using transcripts for this versus whatever those notes or brain dumps that we come up with?
Yeah. So again, there's like not really a right or wrong answer to do the analysis, and I've certainly done both ways, like working off just the recordings itself or working with transcripts. Yeah, so the reason why we focus on transcripts here is we do find a lot of benefit with having the transcripts themselves. It does make it easier for you to backtrace, back to the original transcript. So I kind of showed here, what a code book looks like once you're done. And then one thing that transcripts allows is that you can look at something like a top level theme, like motivations, and then you can look at quotes and then dive back into the original transcript and verify to yourself, who was it that said that? Like, was it Alex? Was it Janice? And then once you've done your coding, another thing that's super valuable too is just being able to see which transcripts those quotes appeared in. So, Delve will automatically do this. Other types of software do this as well. It can be to be able to show you which transcript it appeared in. So one thing that I definitely did as a researcher before I used software like Delve is that I might I might do like 20 interviews, but I got really excited about a particular one. There's a very particular participant that really compelled me. And then without doing transcripts, my end report might potentially really focus in on that. Like focus in on that participant, and that becomes the story of my analysis. But then if I go through the rigorous process of coding and then go through and see that phenomenon that participant talked about, is that something that really appeared in other interviews? It's important regardless, but maybe I'm overrepresenting it. So something like this idea of being able to go through my codes and be like, okay, is this unclear goals? Is that something that's really appearing across everything? It looks like here it's appearing in 4 out of 9. And that can tell me either like, okay, it only shows up in half. Or maybe I can say, wait, I'm pretty sure it showed up in every interview. And maybe I have some quotes missing. So I can just kind of double check my biases when I do the coding with the exact transcripts.
And we'll come back to that because there's one more part I would like for you to show everyone that you can do in terms of an export. But the other question that I had for you when we met the first time, what are some of those common mistakes that researchers make regarding coding? So I had one. What are some of the others?
So sometimes a mistake could be not really being clear on what your research objective is. So I think you mentioned in your other webinar, you talked about like having a plan, like knowing what it looks like each step along the way. So I do think that with coding, it can be very open-ended. So I think it's important to always keep in mind, like, what is the goal of my research? Like, is the goal to understand a motivation? Is it to create a new theory? Is it simply to describe, a particular behavior that we know we're seeing in the quantitative metrics? So that research objective can always tell you, how broad to code or how focused to code. So all your should really relate back to how open or how narrow your questions are.
Mm-hmm. So I don't see any other questions yet. So one of the things that I was really impressed by was this idea of turning qualitative findings into something quantitative, right? You can use the number of times this came up in your sessions if you coded properly to say this is how many times we heard it, right?
Yeah.
Researchers, we can get away from words like some, a few, most, any, and we can say exactly how many said this, right? So
Yeah.
you pull up that export, I think it was like, it goes into like an Excel spreadsheet and you can see, especially when you start thinking about tagging and categorizing your participants, right? So by demographic, age, can you show them that part as well?
Yeah, for sure. So after you've finished your coding, then you can export CSVs and then bring them into your spreadsheets. So here's an example of what I call a code co-occurrence matrix. And then basically what this is showing, and I'm showing this right now in Google Sheets, this basically has along this column, all of my codes. And then in this row, my codes again. So what this is showing me is the overlaps between codes. So every quote can be coded with multiple codes. So for example, here I've got desire to make a difference and then motivations. It's highlighted in a dark green and it says 6. And now what that means is that there's 6 quotes across my project where I had both of these quotes together, both of these codes together. And then with this, I can then just start to see what's beginning to stand out and then focus in and then use that to guide my analysis.
Okay, perfect. What else should researchers take into consideration regarding coding? What are some other things, if any, that researchers should think about or be careful of when it comes to coding?
Yeah, so I think definitely, making sure you stick to your research objective is good. I think there's both the combination of like making sure that you're giving yourself enough creative freedom to really explore and, go out of bounds from what you might have initially thought, while also reining in and making sure you're organized along the way. I do think coding is kind of this like both combination of creative and logical process where you're allowing yourself to see what's in the data, but then you want to rein it in with the hierarchy and start to organize them into themes. So just make sure you keep that balance, stay focused on your research objective, and then in the end, you'll have a stronger research report and findings.
Perfect. So if you saw part 1, we are still right there in sync, right? So, you can't do any of this without having a good plan, knowing what your objectives are, and thinking through each stage of the process. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I want to thank you for taking time to do this with us today. If you all have any questions about the tool, please reach out to LaiYee. If you have any questions about the research positions or Usability Sciences, feel free to reach out to me. This recording will be available, so when it posts, feel free to share it out to your friends and to your networks. Otherwise, everybody have a great day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.